Thanks for inviting me. It's really interesting to be here with so many experts in the field. So my name is Julien Carme. I didn't even put my name on the slide, sorry for that. My name is Julien Carme. I'm working at Worldline. So Worldline, just one word on it. It's a former subsidiary from Atos. So we were part of Atos until a couple of months ago. So all the work I will show here and all the discussion I will have with you is based on things I've done in the context of Atos. So even if today I'm not talking on the behalf of Atos, yeah, I still have my network there. I still work with these people because on these big trends and big issues, it's something we are still working with a much bigger structure like Atos. It's already a good idea for us. So yeah, Worldline is mainly a company about payment transaction and digital transaction in general, and we have a lot of data analytics in it and some data scientists in this company. And I am one of these data scientists. So I have worked for, I come from the research field. I did a PhD at INRIA a long time ago. And for about a decade, I've been working in Worldline as a data scientist, and I work on topics like connected vehicles, like insurance, product recommendation. I work with many different kind of customers from a different kind of business. So today, I will provide a very practical perspective and business-oriented perspective on the topic. I don't consider myself as a deep expert in ethics, and it's more about how a company like Atos is dealing with ethics in the field of AI, and how practically we are dealing with that on a daily basis on our projects. So this slide has been designed by Atos. Atos has a scientific community, which I'm a former member of. It's a community of people who, on the group scale, so the group is 100,000 people, and on the group scale, there are about 100 people who meet and discuss about the future of the company, but also the future of, let's say, the society, the trends, and of course, discussing AI and discussing ethics with AI is typically in the scope of what the scientific community is doing. So there are some people who are trying to think about what Atos do and what Atos should do in the field of ethics. Ethics in general, but I won't talk about that, and ethics in the context of AI. So the basic idea of this approach, so it's just one word, it's a document which tells the vision of Atos on this, and it's currently implemented. It doesn't mean that it's completely implemented. It means that it's a work in progress. Not all of that is today completely operational. I would not say that we are full ethics in AI ready and we are doing things as we want them to do. It's more our vision, and we are working on it. So ethics by design sounds a bit like a marketing tagline. Sorry about that. We had privacy by design, which is quite closely correlated to it before. What does it mean? It means that it's pretty important, actually. It means that Atos is or should work on ethics from the beginning of projects. Well, there are thousands of projects that I'm not saying that we have a big committee investigating ethics for all projects, but for major projects or projects which clearly involve the ethical issues, we think about it from the beginning and we discuss about it with our customers. I will come back to the customer part later. So that's something we have to put in the core of the project design. There are three pillars. One pillar is about law. What we are allowed to do, and that's somehow the easiest part. We were talking about regulation before. Of course, something like GDPR, and in France, even before GDPR, we already had a regulation around data protection and data privacy. We have people, we have specialists of GDPR, we have legal department, and everything we do has to be GDPR checked. And all that is a pretty well-established process. people are trained. Of course, not everyone in Atos know perfectly what is inside GDPR, of course, obviously. But we have some ideas, and when we have doubts, we discuss with the legal department, and they say what we can do and what we cannot do. And somehow it's a pretty comfortable situation. Because when you have a regulation, and when you know that your competitors have the same regulation, well, you follow the regulation, and that's it, somehow. But that doesn't embed all ethics, of course. It's part of it. For us, it's part of it. So now we have ethics. What we put here in ethics, I would say it's ethics outside, it's unregulated ethics somehow. It's ethics outside, practically ethics outside GDPR for us. That's a more complicated issue. Because the boundaries between what is ethical and what is unethical is not so clear. It's much more blurred than when we are talking about law. We are facing sometimes we are working with customers on projects, and we are facing ethical issues. And for this, we need interdisciplinary work. We have people who are specialists on this. At least we start trying to make teams specialists of this. We have an ethical advisory board, or at least it's currently developing. And we start to try training people about this topic and discussing this topic in teams. So I said there are 100,000 people in the company, but much of them are developers, and they are not facing daily this kind of issues. But for the data scientists, for example, we are much more concerned by this. Yeah, they are discussing about that together, and there are exchange places for that, and we are thinking about that for each project. The third pillar is technology. So as we have a lot discussed today, technology can help us dealing with ethical issues. It's not a complete answer, but it can help us a lot. In particular, I will give an example after, but in particular, one very important topic for us is interpretable AI, so we have already discussed that. Very often, we are asked to provide interpretable models. The customer wants that either because it's mandatory for him, or even because he wants to be able to explain a decision done by AI to his own customers, which can be unhappy with the decision of the artificial intelligence. So it's a practical, important message here is that it's a practical concern today in a company like Atos or like Worldline. The whole company try to change its organization somehow in order to adapt to this ethics by design framework to some extent. I mean, I'm not saying it's a complete revolution in the whole company, but still there are some evolutions. I will not go into details into all that on the corners, but there are two things one thing which I think it's important is that we have both a top-down approach and the bottom-up approach somehow. The top-down approach is that the top management of Atos is concerned by this. I personally know at least one person in the board of Atos, so in the already top managers of Atos, who was pretty deep understanding of this, and with quite concerned and with at the initiative of this kind of work done by the scientific community. And they make regulation for the company, like for example building this ethical advisory board. Or, well, when we talk about corporate value or definition, it's obviously it's part communication, of course. But still, when you have a message from the top manager who goes to everyone, it means that it's something which counts for the company. And on the other side, there is an evolution which is done on bottom-up. All people are encouraged to think about these topics via training. So we already have ethics training in the company. Practically, our ethics training is mainly deontology. It's mainly about what we are allowed to do and what we should do and should not do in general. So, but it's slowly, in my opinion, it's slowly evolving through more ethics in general. So we have training on that. And as I said previously, we have discussion in the teams that are working on this kind of topics on ethics. So that was the general Atos framework, which I think makes sense and show how the general company is dealing with ethics. But now what I want to do is giving you some feedback about actual projects we had and in which we had to deal with ethics in AI. Most of the time, we are working. One first thing I want to say here, which I think is pretty important in the IT industry in Europe, in France in particular, but in Europe as well, is that most of the time we are working for customers which are not the final users. We are in the B2B sector, business to business. So we are doing an IT project for a company which itself has its own data, has its own customers, and has its own view on ethical issues. And we are working on data that we do not own. The customer owns the data. The customer and his customer and its customers own the data. And that puts us sometimes in a rather uncomfortable situation, because we are supposed to do what the customer tells us to do, but we have also a duty to advise the customer on what he should do in terms of ethics. There were actually a change if we go back to the regulation part, there were a change with the GDPR on this. Well, I'm not complete expert in GDPR, so I hope I will not say wrong things, but there are a change with this. Now, as an IT provider, we share half the responsibility with our customer if we do something which is in violation of GDPR. So that we, of course, we cannot say something like, okay, the customer wants this, we do this, it's not our business anyway, we do the technical stuff, we are just a technical guy. If you are complaining about ethics, just go and see him and that's it. We cannot do that. We don't want to anyway, but just to be clear, we cannot do that. And sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable because we have a customer who want to do something and we are not in the best position to tell him, no, you shouldn't, because, well, the customer is king, as you know. And of course, we have competitors as well, and it's a situation which is not so easy. But we consider ourselves as somehow advisors in terms of what we can do and what we should do. I will take an example and finish on this. Some years ago, I worked with an insurance company on a project called Pay How You Drive. There are many different insurance companies working on these kind of things. So the idea is that the driver will pay some amount of money which depend on how he or she drives. Well, the idea is pretty good. The idea that if you drive well, you don't pay too much. If you don't drive well, you pay more because the risk of having an accident is higher. But then that raises plenty of ethical problems. And I will just cite three. The first problem it addresses, I will go from the easiest to the hardest somehow. The first problem it addresses, the first issues with this kind of project is around privacy, because you want to gather a lot of data, as much data as possible, about your customer, if you want to be able to to estimate the risk for him to have an accident. This data can be personal data. This data can be where he drives, how he drives in the terms of acceleration, deceleration, speed, and all that, at what time he drives, and where he goes. And there are plenty of data that will be completely relevant from a purely technical point of view. However, it's pretty clear, even if in this case we have the full consent of the user, because it's of course not something which the user has to do. The user chooses to subscribe to this kind of service, but still, all these data that we are gathering, they clearly raise plenty of privacy problems, which are anyway goes in the scope of the GDPR. So I will not go into details, but the first massive problem with this kind of project is privacy protection. Second problem, transparency. At some point, if a user see the price of his insurance increasing, he will complain and request an explanation about why does the price of insurance has increased. And if the models are using private information about it, that may raise the issue. But also, if we are not able to tell him at all why the price is this and not this, and what his neighbor or his wife or husband pays more or less or something like that, and we are not able to give him any answer, that's an issue. And finally, to me, the one which is probably the biggest one is about fairness. Fairness is one of these ethics in AI identified issue. It's a very broad and blurred topic, but I think it's pretty interesting. And then it goes to the core business of the insurer. At some point in the future, if we go really to the limit of this idea of pay how you drive, you will be able to predict if someone will have an accident or not. Maybe not, but that's a thought experiment. Let's say we are able to predict it, or at least to give a very good evaluation of the risk. Somehow, what does it mean? It means that the people who have a high risk, according to the algorithm, of having an accident, they will have the choice either to pay a lot of money for their insurance or to be completely outside the possibility of being insured. It might be seen as a discrimination by design somehow. That's an issue, because when you subscribe to an insurance, what do? You share the risk with other people who are insured. It's a risk sharing between all the people who are insured. Of course, you pay more if you have a bigger car and all that. But with this kind of technology, we are able to make such a personalized insurance that you're not sharing the risk at all. Somehow, they know the risk, and you pay exactly for this risk, which means there is no solidarity anymore between the user of this insurance. And you end up having to pay more insurance because of personal things, and that can be, I think rightfully, seen as completely unfair. And at some point, what's interesting in this case is that at some point you have not just to think about how to do things well, but you have to think about whether your actual goal, that you might be able to do it technically well, is relevant or not. So it's something we have. We had some informal discussion with the insurer about that, and they were perfectly conscious of that, and they are working on this kind of topic. So in this project, we have limited the data that we are using to the actual behavioral data, like what time does he drive and where, something like that, and how fast, how he accelerate. We should not use the speed. We have no right for that because it's a legal thing. And of course, and that limits the risk of doing something that we might consider as discrimination. But that doesn't solve this problem in general, I think. And insurers in the future, they will face that, because that somehow might change their job to something else, which leads to, in my opinion, massive ethical issues. So that's it for the example. And in many of our verticals, we are dealing with that. As a conclusion of this small talk, I want to say that in some case, you can have young engineers, or not so young, but let's say technically experienced guy, but people who have no long feedback about AI and who are maybe not so far thought too much about AI, who are facing these kind of issues. And it's important that they should not have to solve and to make decisions on that by themselves. And that's why the companies are now generated kind of framework, so that people can think about that together with people who have the knowledge, and also with the rest of the society, through regulation or not. But yeah, to me it's important that people can exchange information in order to make a better decision in these kind of cases, because at school so far people are not trained to solve this kind of problems, as far as I know. Thank you.